or descriptions of boobs. What was up with that? Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a 5x5 of Fairytale Retellings. Alright, before I get to anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is your favorite fairy tale retelling. In fact, plan this to come out just as spring hit, because fairy tales and springtime, they work together in my brain for some reason. I don't know why. Then I realized that all of these books, yeah, they definitely fit more a winter vibe, but this is when the video was planned, so we're just gonna roll with it. So welcome to another 5x5. If you are unaware what my 5x5 is, it is a series in which I am trying to find 5-star reads within a single theme. I haven't succeeded thus far, but I will put a link to my playlist up above with all my previous tries. So this one I thought would be great because I am a retelling girl. I love a good retelling. Fairy tale, mythology, folklore, anything around there, it's gonna work for me. Maybe it's because A Cinderella Story was like my favorite movie as a kid. Who's to say? I will say across the board on all of these, they do fall into the adult category. I will start out by giving you a summary of the book, followed by a 50% update with an estimated rating, and then a final update with an actual rating. I've actually never explained the fact of why I do an estimated rating, but I think it's fun for myself to try and figure out if I actually know which way my feelings are gonna lean for a book. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. More often than not, I'm right. So first up is The Book of Gothel by Mary mcmyne. This story is actually a retelling of the mother of Rapunzel, which I thought would be a very interesting perspective to look at with that. It is set in 12th century Germany, in which we're following a woman who has always been a little bit strange and suffers from these spells that, unfortunately for her, most of the village believes to be witchcraft. However, her mother protects her with all she can, but when her mother ends up passing, she ends up running into the woods and stumbling upon an actual witch. From there, she learns about the actual magic that exists in this world, as well as the actual horrors. As unfortunately, she is not the only woman seeking refuge with the Witch of the Wood, Gothel. Hey y'all, so I've hit the halfway point into the Book of Gothel. You would not know this is a Rapunzel retelling if it were not sold that way. And then I guess there was a single throwaway line right at the beginning that mentioned Rapunzel, but that's it. I can also say this doesn't really have the whimsy I tend to associate with a lot of fairy tale retellings. That's not always necessary in the writing style for a fairy tale retelling, but that sort of writing style does tend to enhance my experience with it and better relate whatever the story is to the original. Not so here. The fantasy elements actually are pretty light. There's a very, very soft magic system. And like, even with that, I wouldn't really call it a magic system. While yes, some of the female characters we have met are sold to us as witches, really it seems more almost like an apothecary-based knowledge or homeopathy, and the understanding of the medicinal properties of a lot of those plants or items, whatever it is. There is some stuff that is going on that is fantastical, but those are few and far between. I do like the religious discussions kind of taking place in the competing belief systems, because there are women like 𝗖cie, like her mother, where their beliefs are more old school paganism. That's where we get the tie-ins to witchcraft, but there's also the main church that is in power for her town. So I like the religious themes. I think the author has done a fairly good job with atmosphere. This definitely does settle you into the historical place. Sometimes I feel like she's going a little bit too over the top with the setting. It seems like she's just trying to lengthen the story. As far as characters go, I am not attached to anybody, including 𝗖cie, our main character. There are elements of her character which we have seen through her actions that I respect her for, but I just feel like I don't really know her. I don't really have a grasp of her personality. I don't really feel like I have a reason to really root for her, apart from, you know, being a woman that's bucking society's norms at this point. I'm always going to be pro that, but I need a little bit more to really like her. The writing style is very tell, not show. It seems like we're sort of just watching 𝗖cie experience these events, but a lot of the time she's not really doing anything to move the story forward. It's just
a detailing of her life. I don't know, like on one hand, sure, it's kind of interesting to watch, but on the other hand, it's just not giving me what I went into this book wanting, which is a Rapunzel retelling. There are definitely elements of the story that I can see maybe starting to lean into 𝗖cie becoming more of a villainous character, but like not enough. It just feels like this is just taking way too long to get to the real meat of what I want in this plot. So right now, for a estimated rating, I would probably go with a 3-star. If I was having more negative feelings about this, I would DNF it. But currently, I'm just sort of ambivalent about it. It's fine. It's just not really what I was wanting.
Hey y'all, so I have decided to DNF the Book of Gothel, unfortunately. I went from feeling very meh about this in my last update to quite quickly after realizing, ooh, I don't like where this is going. Still maintain it's kind of weird that the Rapunzel retelling was really at the forefront of the marketing for this book, because there was nothing to do with Rapunzel going on here. And in fact, the gothel element itself had started to not matter anymore because 𝗖cie was leaving the tower. I still maintain that the author created the setting very well. It was very atmospheric. It was enveloping. I think she paid a lot of attention to details. It seemed as though she put a lot of research into this book, because there were just little things that would be dropped here and there that was like, huh, that's super interesting. And whenever I'd look it up, they'd always be true. But sometimes, unfortunately, it seemed like she was just going a little bit too far. It felt at times that she was just trying to fill the page by adding all of this information. And while I think having all of that stuff is really cool, it makes this feel more like a historical book than a fantasy, which was only reinforced with the fact that the magic system was so incredibly soft. I could tell that there was a setup with the plot of this discussion around competing religious beliefs, which I was all over, but that just wasn't really getting enough attention for me, unfortunately. 𝗖cie was fine. I didn't particularly care about her for most of the book. There was a specific event that did endear me towards her slightly. Then, right after I hit the halfway point, there was a turn of events, and her response to them was so against everything we had just watched her experience that I couldn't help wondering, how could she possibly think this is going to go well? Everything we've just seen her experience tells her the opposite, and yet she's like, no, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna do this, it'll be great, it's gonna end fine. And we've just seen that all of her experiences have told her that's probably not gonna happen. I still don't think she had much of a personality. With this book so far, it's felt like a very character-based story. So if I don't feel particularly strong about the character, it's unsurprising I didn't care about anything else in the book. In the end, I think this was a pretty cool idea, the whole wicked but for Rapunzel. However, what I got in the end just did not live up to that. Very sad to say that I DNF'd this. I'm bummed because I was pretty excited for this book.
Yikes, okay. Not where I saw that going. Let down. Anyway, on to the next. I am very excited for this one, so fingers crossed it'll work out. Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. This is a juniper tree retelling, which is a fairy tale I really don't know much about, but I believe it is considered one of Grimm's most violent and horrific fairy tales. So Ava Reid, who definitely has a gory and unsettling writing style, I think they'll hit this perfectly. This story is following our main character, who is one of 3 daughters to an insanely powerful wizard in their town. However, unfortunately, because the Industrial Revolution is hitting, more and more people aren't really needing a wizard's power. Their father is not pleased about this, and on top of that has actually been cursed to never be satisfied. Yet occasionally the 3 daughters actually get to travel out into this town and experience some of the new upcoming things taking place in their world. But one night the 3 of them actually go to a ballet, and our main character ends up falling in love with the head dancer. So of course, with young love, she constantly is trying to get out of the house and going to see him. But at the same time, there also seems to be this mysterious monster that has come to the town and is wreaking havoc on its inhabitants. I have not heard the best things about this, but to be fair, I've heard negative reviews from people who went into this expecting a horror book, whereas I'm going into this expecting a fantasy story. So we'll see.
Hey y'all, so excuse the poor lighting. I'm filming this exactly when the sun is perfectly shining in my skylight. Hey, I hit the halfway point into Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. I gotta say, I forgot how much I really enjoy Ava Reid's writing. I think a gothic fantasy horror story is like the perfect genre combo for her style. She creates such a whimsically creepy atmosphere and manages to make this very mystical setting also feel shiver-inducing. The horrific elements in this are talked about in such a way that they are grotesquely beautiful, which I definitely think lines up with the gothic aspect of the story. The Slavic folklore that is worked into this as well, I really enjoy. That was something I liked a lot about her prior book, and I think it's really clever how she utilizes the folklore to tie in with the juniper tree elements of the story. We're actually told some of these folklore-based stories that our main character Marlichin grew up on, and those specifically really highlight the strengths of Reid's writing. I think those chapters so far have kind of been my favorite. With that being said though, as much as I really do enjoy her writing style, this plot and our main character are just not hooking me in, unfortunately. Marlichin is so used to being ignored as the youngest child. She and her sisters are constantly being beaten down by their father. I've never seen him lay a hand on them, but he's still just so oppressive in the household. Marlichin is very timid, she's really awkward, she embarrasses very easily. Unfortunately, she is just the perfect kind of character that I have a really difficult time connecting with. She seems almost like the family punching bag, and not just for everybody else. She herself is constantly talking down at her body, her mindset, at how she acts. She actually does suffer from an eating disorder, which is seen on page, so I want you to be aware of that if you need it. Thankfully, I will say, we have already seen a little bit of growth from her in the book. She's maybe developing a little bit of a backbone. I say maybe because it's not a lot, but something at least. A single viewing of a ballet was enough to make Marlichin fall in love with this character 𝗖cie. I just don't feel the romance between them at all. It feels more like insta-lust, if anything, and by this point, I guess I can say I see that these two are clinging to this relationship, which is a small bit of purity in their lives where it's very clear they're each dealing with some very terrible things, but that doesn't really mean I have an investment in the relationship. I can see why they're so drawn to each other, but it's not enough to convince me that they should have a happily ever after. The plot is equally as dark as the writing style is at times. Thus far, I would have to say there's definitely some allusions to even darker things, which we haven't quite touched on yet. Trying to prepare for that, yet I would not say this feels like a juniper tree retelling. I do see there are moments where certain things are referenced from the original juniper tree fairy tale, and I have tabbed some of those, but overall the plot just doesn't really correlate with the juniper tree story. If anything, right now, I would say it feels more like it's inspired by it. Unfortunately, because really the biggest winning factor for me right now is the writing style, my estimated rating at this moment is 3 stars. I'm definitely going to continue reading it because, again, I love her writing style. It's so good, and I really want to have more of those chapters seeing the fairy tales that Marlichin grew up on. I'm just not really expecting this to be a new favorite, unfortunately, and I'm very sad about that.
Hey y'all, so I officially finished up Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. Sold as a juniper tree retelling, and I mentioned the fact that our main character Marlichin gives us a story that she grew up hearing. As far as I can find in the research I've done, it doesn't seem like that story is actually a real fairy tale. There are elements of that story she told which I can see in the juniper tree as well as in 2 other Slavic folklore stories I looked up. But really, majority of this book actually feels like it's more a retelling of that story. That's really cool, in my opinion, as far as like how she set up this book and then how she followed through with it. That's not a juniper tree retelling. It's more like a story within a book scenario. That's cool, I like it, but
it's a marketing issue. There are definitely a lot of themes and elements from the juniper tree which are seen in here, which explains why there are so many heavy topics being discussed. A lot of those you actually see on page. This definitely gets a little bit more horrific as you continue in. The latter half of the book is actually the most exciting, most drive in the plot. And the last 100 pages is probably where I enjoyed Marlinchen the most. I still wasn't sold on the romance. I thought they were kind of cute. That was about it. I just didn't feel the chemistry between them. It seemed very lust space, and like each of them were just clinging onto this small bit of happiness that they found whilst dealing with all their crap. But I will admit, there are some lines about the romance that are written in this which were gorgeous, and I couldn't help but tab. There was one where I was listening to the audio while I cleaned. It actually made me stop and just be like, oh my God, that was so romantic. And I immediately had to go tab it. Being frank, the last 100 pages are probably the best part of this, unless like 150. Those were the ones that definitely bumped my rating for this. I still adored Reid's writing the entire way through, but I think if this had been a novella and everything in the prior bits had been chopped out, that I probably would have given like 4.5 stars. For me, this came down to like 3.5 stars. I think my compile actually came out to 3 stars, but the elements that I did really like, I felt warranted a 3.5.
Sad day. I mean, I'm still absolutely gonna read everything Reid writes, but this was not the 5-star I was anticipating. Let's try out a new author and see how that goes for me with Brom, who wrote The Child Thief. I've heard a million positive things about Brom's work. I will start there. But most of those rave reviews have been about Slewfoot and Krampus, not The Child Thief. This one is a Peter Pan retelling, which I think is a fantastic fairy tale to try and go horror route with, but I believe it also has a little bit of like the Mists of Avalon woven into it, which is more Arthurian legend. So I'm really interested to see where this goes. Initially, we are following 14-year-old Nick, who unfortunately for him is on the run from dealers who he made have a bad day, I'll put it that way. But he's convinced he's officially lost it when none other than Peter Pan comes down to save him. Realizing he has no real options, he decides to continue along with Peter into this magical place that he talks about with all these fairies and monsters. When he actually arrives in Neverland and realizes that it is not the thing of fairy tales, it is far darker and far more gory than he is expecting. So excited.
Hey y'all, so I unfortunately can't do it anymore. I can't. I tried, I really did, but I am gonna have to DNF The Child Thief at 29%. So much of this book is either the characters saying the word or descriptions of boobs. What was up with that? I think literally every single female character who was ever introduced, whether they were important or not, their boobs were described. And it was so unnecessary, so weird, just came across as super creepy. I don't get it. Apart from those two big things that really miffed me, I did also just have a very hard time with the writing style in this book. It's not necessarily bad if you ignore the two previous things. I think Brom can paint a picture very well with his words, but I just never really felt anything for this book. The plot was building, but it wasn't super interesting, and there would only be little bits revealed to us or questions answered as I was going along. They were just enough to keep me engaged, but obviously since I'm DNFing it, not anymore. The world building also was taking place in Peter's chapters because this alternated back and forth between Peter and Nick. This was going to mix the Peter Pan story with Arthurian legend and then also add Celtic folklore. I think those three things together is so unexpected, very intriguing, but it would just be done in these giant info drops. And unsurprisingly, it just made the story not flow well at all. There were actually a few horror scenes that I did think were fairly well done. Our main character, Nick, the newest recruit by Peter, is a pretty stereotypical early teenager. He still rides that line between being a child and being a teenager, and he is just so annoying. He puts himself into terrible situations again and again, only to get through those by the skin of his teeth and with assistance, usually from Peter. Peter, on the other hand, reads like a psychopath, but not in the way I was expecting when I started this book. With this being labeled as the child thief, I thought it was going to go the route of, Peter Pan is the villain character. He is stealing kids, killing them, and taking them to Neverland. Like that's how it works. But as his background is revealed and we learn more about Neverland, it becomes clear that it's not quite that simple. There's more layers to the story. Then with his background being revealed, it seemed like we were supposed to pity him and start to understand his mindset, why he's so cold towards humans, particularly adults, why he hates them. Tying back to my earlier complaint, Brom's writing just didn't evoke any emotion from me for Peter. Unfortunately, I started to waffle between continuing or putting this book down, so I checked out a few reviews, and when I noticed that majority of my thoughts lined up more with the 1-star reviews, I realized I should give up. And then when it was reinforced by the fact that I didn't even care enough about what was happening to look up spoilery reviews, DNFing is the best choice here, which is such a shame. And now I don't know if I want to touch anything else of Brom's because I had such a poor experience here.
Apparently, I need to stop showcasing excitement because it just keeps biting me in the ass. I am a little bit more hopeful for this next one, Girl in Red by Christina Henry. I have read from Christina Henry previously. I read her Alice duology and I did enjoy that. Obviously, this one is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, but it is set in a post-apocalyptic world. Kind of works perfectly with this fairy tale. Honestly, the synopsis on this one is super vague. There was some sort of a disease that ravaged the entire world and most of the population, and yet we're simply following this young woman who is walking a long distance to try and reach her grandmother's house.
Hey y'all, so I've hit the halfway point into The Girl in Red by Christina Henry, and first off, wow, very weird reading this after having lived through a pandemic. It's so strange how many things Henry got perfectly right in this book, and it literally came out a year before 2020. That's prophetic and creepy. It's very interesting that I'm saying I like this book so far because it's definitely, obviously, a dystopian story. That's something I don't really tend to enjoy. It's very reminiscent to a zombie book without actually having zombies because there's an infection that's brewing, but it doesn't create, people who are trying to eat each other. Rather, it like shuts down their, let's go with breathing system, I guess, and seems as though it's maybe melting their organs because anytime we interact with somebody who's infected, there's a lot of blood, which definitely is reinforcing this as a horror book. Our main character, Red, is also very interesting to me. For starters, we see her life both before and after this pandemic. Before, we see her interacting with her parents, with her brother, and then after, she is completely alone. But true to the Red Riding Hood story, she is walking through all of these woods to reach her grandmother's house, which she believes and hopes is going to be the safe haven for her. There is a lot of discussions going on. Her parents initially aren't taking this as seriously as she is because she's a sci-fi and horror movie fanatic. It's kind of similar to like Jade and My Heart is a Chainsaw, where she's experienced all these stories a million times, so she knows how to survive. She has the layout, but nobody's listening to her. I also think it's cool from a character perspective that Red is a mixed woman, and so we see how that affects her experience in the before timeline, which I don't want to go into too many specifics there because of spoilers. But it was interesting for Henry to bring that up. On top of that, Red is also disabled. She has an over-the-knee prosthetic, which obviously affects her everyday life in a apocalypse. But at the same time, though it does slow her down slightly, she is still the final girl. She is still the lone survivor that we're following in the after timeline. I say survivor, we don't necessarily know everything that happened to her family, but you can imagine. Something that I do think is very cool is anytime she interacts with a person whilst hiking by herself, that obviously means her harm, she refers to them in wolf terms. And I do like that little callback to the original fairy tale that Henry is sliding in. But that's really all I can talk to y'all about. I'm liking this. I think the writing is well done because even though a lot of the after timeline is read by herself, just
hiking through the woods, which seems like it'd be pretty boring. I'm actually very invested in ensuring that she manages to do what she wants, that she gets to grandmother's house. For timeline, I think Henry has written so well because there's so much emotion behind all of the events you're seeing. So right now, my estimated rating for this is probably gonna be like, I'll say a 4-star. Because I'm optimistic for the end of this book, but I also just have no idea what could possibly happen. I mean, I do have an idea what could possibly happen. It could go in one of two ways, but like, I don't know how we could possibly reach either of those in a manner that I'll enjoy.
Hey y'all, so I finished out The Girl in Red by Christina Henry, and I must say, I am surprised that I liked this as much as I did, seeing as how that's a micro genre / trope that I just really don't like majority of the time. But in the end, I liked how this wrapped up. The more we see of Red as a main character in this book, the more time you spend in her head, the less likable you realize she is. But I do think the background we see from her and her experiences, as well as like her relationships with people, really explain why she is so abrasive. And on top of that, I really liked this element when you think about the fact that this book is kind of subverting the idea of the victim in the Red Riding Hood story. Especially with Red being disabled, she is not a damsel in distress. She refuses to allow her disability to make her a victim. Even though we constantly see every single person she ever interacts with starts to view her in that way once they learn that element of her. Again, I really like how Henry treated her character, particularly seeing as how this is a Red Riding Hood retelling. I just thought it was handled in a very clever way. With this being a horror book, there is some gore, and I do think it was done fairly well. And then with this sort of a setup, it's not really surprising that a lot of the book, you're very unsettled. You're very on the edge of your seat, not sure what's around the next corner. That being said, with this having a before and after timeline, I don't think this sort of a setup really lends well to a bunch of twists. Even with that, some of the turns that the plot took, I did not see coming. But there were others that I think would have packed more of a punch if this just had a chronological one timeline rather than the back and forth. There's also so little explanation to the illness that has caused this pandemic. And on one hand, it makes perfect sense logically in the world that Henry has created because information has broken down. So the society isn't really able to easily communicate the ins and outs of this illness. But that doesn't mean I was satisfied with not really having answers to it. And sort of jumping off of that, ending of this book is something that I definitely think certain people will like and other people will be pissed off by it. Thankfully, I fall in the prior camp. I don't mind those sorts of endings when it comes to horror books. If anything, I think with this setup in general, that sort of an ending fits very perfectly, but I totally see why some people would not like that and dock this a lot of stars for it. But for me, in the end, this came out to 4 stars. Was not perfect. I did still have a few issues with it. Happily surprised. I really need to check out more of Henry's work. Everything I've read from her, I do enjoy, and I love the fact that she does horrific retellings of fairy tales.
Okay, not a 5-star, but at least it was a positive review. That is something better than the rest of this video has been. I'm taking this as a win. I don't know if I'm holding out hope for a 5-star in this video anymore with this last one, Bryony and Roses by 𝗖cie Kingfisher. This is gonna be my first of 𝗖cie Kingfisher's work, somebody who I've heard a lot of praise for. But this one, a Beauty and the Beast retelling, is a bit less known than most of her other work. Specifically with this one, we are following Bryony, who unfortunately for her is trapped in a snowstorm, but luckily for her, stumbles upon this glorious magical mansion and stays there for a night, only to have some unexpected company.
Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point into Bryony and Roses. Please excuse my very nasally voice. I'm currently fighting off a cold, but I need to film this update because I want to keep reading. The last Beauty and the Beast retelling I read was ACOTAR, so honestly, this didn't have really high competition, but even with that, I think Kingfisher is absolutely roasting it. This is so funny. I totally get what everybody was saying about Kingfisher's writing now because I'm adoring it. Bryony's thoughts alone have had me laughing, but also the banter between her and the Beast is just fantastic. I am eating it up. And also because of it, I am so excited for any bits of romance between these two. I think the comedic feeling to all of their interactions has just made me love the dynamic there, but also has made me really care for both of the characters already. I really like Bryony as a main character. She's really headstrong, she is very perseverant. She wants to take care of her sisters and also just tries to see the positive in a really unfortunate situation that she's stuck in.
Oh, and again, she's super funny. So far, I'm really appreciating the aspects that Kingfisher has stuck true to the original Beauty and the Beast story. For example, the Beast always ends the night by asking Bryony if she will marry him, and she always turns him down. The house itself is also enchanted. It actually acts almost as another character. It'll create anything Bryony needs, but sometimes it's not exactly to the standard she's wanting or needing, and like in those specific circumstances, the house kind of gets a little attitude, will take offense to that, and it's so oddly adorable. On top of that, Bryony and her sisters once lived a life of luxury and have since had that ripped away from them. And Bryony is the only one who has really embraced the simplistic rural lifestyle. However, there are a few changes to the original story, but I'm actually really enjoying all of those, and I think they weave together with the things that have stayed true very well. Some of the major ones are, first off, Bryony's father has already passed, and she and her sisters actually have a very healthy relationship. When she goes to leave, she actually takes the rose as a gift for her sister. There's also something suspicious about the magic in the house that has me very intrigued. It prevents the Beast from talking about specifics of his life and his predicament. Anytime he tries, things get a little eerie. It's as though shadows overtake the room and a cold wind will blow by. Everything just sort of freezes in the moment. I'm impressed by that because everything else in this book feels very fairy tale in the whimsical, happy way, but those scenes are definitely reinforcing like the dark, sinister bits. I also absolutely adore the gardening element that is added into the story. Bryony made her living by growing vegetables and flowers and then selling those. And she actually really loves this as a craft. So when she goes to stay at the castle, she brings everything she would need to continue gardening while there, even though it's completely unnecessary thanks to the magic within the manor. However, it's not just a job for her. She has real passion for it. And so I think that also has endeared me to her. But on top of that, her gardening time has now allowed for bonding time with the Beast. And it's very cute. Love all the little interactions they have shared whenever they're gardening together. But of course, there is also the mutual love of books. So for right now, my estimated rating is 4 stars. I'm really liking this. I'm very hopeful that I will continue to really like it. Like I said, I just want to keep reading it. Okay guys, so this one actually went very, very well. I talked about before that I was really impressed with some of the aspects that Kingfisher stayed true to and some of the things that they changed. Another aspect that is revealed to us in the latter half is that Bryony actually does have these dreams of a very beautiful man who is asking her for help, similar to the original story. But there is another little twist there that I thought was incredibly clever, which leads me into the next aspect of things that Kingfisher changed. When we finally get the reveal as to what's actually going on, I was so impressed because I did not see that coming. It fit perfectly with the fantastical world here, had elements of the original Beauty and the Beast story, but at the same time was so original and clever and unsettling, while also really sticking true to the entire aesthetic of this story, which no, I will not go into specifics about. Writing all the way through it was so bingeable, so consumable. I just wanted to keep reading. And once again, reinforcing that it is freaking funny. I really had a good time with this. When we see more of Bryony's sister, Holly, I loved her. She was so fun. Again, I really liked this one. It's a very short read. I don't even think the audiobook was 6 hours, so I highly recommend, especially if you like Fairytale retellings. The importance of Bryony being a gardener was so clever at the climax. And I also loved it because it allowed her to be the heroine of the end of the story, and that just was fantastic in my book. This one actually came out to 4.5 stars, guys. I'm still so happy about that. We have at least one. 4.5 counts for a 5-star in these videos. We at least got one. It's something. On that note, thank you so much for coming to my channel, y'all. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a bee emoji in the comments. Also, while you're down there, I have my socials linked in the description if you're interested in keeping up with what I am reading, as well as a few ways you can support me. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!